The whole international community was left utterly astonished by the recent India-Pakistan conflict. Why? Because Pakistan dealt India a crushing defeat, a historic thrashing that will likely be written into the annals of war. The impact of this battle may even surpass that of the Gulf War. Make no mistake, this was the most technologically sophisticated war in human history thus far, and an epic victory for the Islamic world in post-World War II external conflicts. On the surface, this appeared as a conventional India-Pakistan rivalry, but in reality, it was a proxy war. Behind Pakistan stood China, while behind India loomed a coalition akin to the Eight-Nation Alliance plus the entire Western world. Yet despite this, our ally Pakistan thoroughly rooted the West's proxy India. India never anticipated becoming a global testing ground for conventional weapons, repeatedly targeted and humiliated on the battlefield. By Chinese standards, this crushing defeat would unquestionably qualify as a national humiliation. In most nations, such a loss would trigger nationwide outrage, angry public protests, scathing media criticism, and government resignations. Historians would solemnly document this disgrace as a lesson for future generations. In fact, a government like Modi's would likely have already fallen. But this is India nation, where even the most absurd outcomes seem par for the course. Just as we struggled to comprehend its initial military provocation, its post-defeat reactions have been equally baffling. As online jokes often quip, everything has levels: mild, moderate, severe. And then there's India. It's a land of perpetual surprises, constantly defying expectations. To understand India's peculiar behavior, we must examine its deeper cultural DNA. Compared to Chinese people, Indians seem like inhabitants of a different planet. Reflectiveness is ingrained in Chinese culture. Our ancestors emphasized self-introspection thrice daily from the analects, and we not only reflect on our own mistakes, but also learn from others. Chinese history reads like a vast book of errors. While we briefly acknowledge triumphs, we deeply analyze failures and humiliations to draw lessons and preserve ancient wisdom. India, however, despite claiming ancient civilization, has lost touch with its own history largely because Indians historically neglected recording it. Modern Indians must rely on Chinese historical records like Faxian's record of Buddhist kingdoms and Xuanzang's Great Tang records on the western regions to piece together their past. Archaeology in India hinges on these texts. The root of India's lack of reflection lies in its dominant faith, Hinduism, and its caste system. This system hierarchizes society into Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, Kshatras, and the untouchable Dalits, with hereditary roles and strict marriage taboos. A Shudra is taught that their birth reflects past life sins, with no hope of worldly advancement except through next life's rebirth or exorbitant dowries, which few low-caste families can afford. Unlike China's historical meritocracy via imperial exams or military service, India's caste system is an immutable social mountain. A wealthy Shudra remains socially inferior, while a destitute Brahmin commands respect even from prime ministers. With destiny preordained at birth, why strive for change? There's little incentive to learn from ancestors or reflect on history. Hinduism directs devotees toward three paths to improve karma: the path of knowledge, philosophy, meditation, yoga; the path of action, selfless service; and the path of devotion, zealous worship. High caste Indians, exempt from manual labor, often engage in intellectual debates. Under banyan trees, prestige comes from rhetorical victory. Living in the tropics, where survival requires minimal effort, even Buddhism born in India emphasizes meditation and asceticism. This religious mindset creates a spiritual fortress. Indians view earthly suffering as virtuous karma cleansing, bringing them closer to the divine. This explains why leftist armed struggles often fail. Low-caste fighters fear shooting could curse their next life. In 2020, a 19-year-old Dalit girl was tortured to death, yet her family was ostracized. Such is the brutal reality of caste. Back to the India-Pakistan conflict. India's behavior follows its historical pattern of all bark, no bite. It aggressively provokes, collapses when pressured, boasts when released, and even grandly celebrated its victory for 10 days, a spectacle of absurdity. In fact, India's 4,000-year history is a litany of invasions conquered by Aryans, Persians, Macedonians, Greeks, and even the subordinates of China's Western Han dynasty. Later came Turks, Mongols, and British. India has long been a holy grail for conquerors, a nation repeatedly bitten by history's predators. Why is India so ineffective? Summarized into 4 key issues. 1. Historical amnesia. No institutional memory to draw lessons from past mistakes. 2. Lack of resilience. Far from a fighting nation, little collective will to endure struggles. 3. Religious shackles. Paralyzed by dogma, prioritizing ritual over practical action. 4. Absent cultural cohesion. No unified national ethos or sense of shared destiny. Despite its ancient civilization label, India has inherited dross rather than wisdom. The caste system and Hinduism have crippled its social development. Contrast this with China, a nation that understands progress requires focus and hard work. Why does this mindset prevail in China? Because our history is a living textbook. Even uneducated citizens learn wisdom from operas and storytelling. From Gujian's perseverance spring and autumn period to the Qin dynasty's strategic governance, from the Western Han's recovery policies to the Tang dynasty's weak alliance diplomacy, and from early Ming's build high walls, store grain, delay king's strategy to modern struggles, China's path is defined by wisdom and tenacity. Since 1921, China has made pragmatic decisions, radical revolution when needed, strategic alignment with the USSR, decisive action in Korean War, bold reforms in opening up, and calculated patience when necessary. The Korean War, for example, not only secured national prestige but also won comprehensive Soviet aid, laying the foundation for industrialization. India, by contrast, enjoys far superior diplomatic advantages courted by all UN Security Council permanent members, with Soviet support once exceeding that given to China. Yet despite this assistance, it repeatedly undermines allies, recently even bungling the French Rafale jet deal. In the 1970s-80s, China steadily shifted from war and revolution to peace and development, enduring humiliations like the Galaxy incident, Taiwan Strait crises, embassy bombing, and South China Sea collisions to prioritize economic growth. We even collaborated with Japan despite historical tensions, demonstrating strategic courage. India cannot replicate this. Shackled by electoral politics, nationalism, and religious strife, it provokes conflicts along the Sino-Indian and India-Pakistan borders while struggling with Hindu-Muslim tensions at home. Its habit of attacking foreign businesses has destroyed its investment climate. While China fosters fish in ponds, nurtures industries, India serves roasted suckling pig extracts aggressively, slapping huge fines on foreign firms, scaring away investors. China's rise stems from self-reliance and seizing globalization opportunities, like industrial relocation. India, ideally positioned to cooperate with China given China's Belt and Road initiatives and industrial capacity, instead chooses posturing and anti-China rhetoric, abetting mob attacks on Chinese firms. Capital fears risk, so why invest in India? Now, it wastes money on a military arms race with China, deploying 100,000 troops in the Himalayas to match China's 10,000, a fool's errand. On education, China has transitioned from demographic dividend to engineer dividend. India, despite 200 years of British colonialism, has only approximately 100 million fluent English speakers with heavy accents, a laughably low literacy standard, and 30% illiteracy rate. Worse, with 22 official languages and only 46% Hindi speakers, students often become illiterate when moving between regions, a legacy of historical disunity. Critics claim India is growing rapidly, but this reflects its low starting point, like a failing student improving slightly. When China and India were at similar development levels, both saw 13 to 15% growth. Now, even India's low labor costs can't compete with China's robotics and AI. By alienating the one nation it needed most, India has barred itself from modernization. The bottleneck isn't external, it's India's own flawed strategy. Seduced by America's containment of China and emboldened by its rise from the 10th to 5th largest economy to 01 for 2024, soon to surpass Japan, Germany, India has grown overconfident, poisoning Sino-Indian ties. Before 2020, it enjoyed a golden era of Chinese investment. Over half of India's mobile phones were made by Chinese firms, with companies bending over backward to meet its demands. Now, it squandered that opportunity. Mobile phone brands, major Chinese manufacturers either built factories directly in India or commissioned local OEM factories, OEMs, for production. The rest of India's smartphone production capacity primarily comes from Samsung, with a small portion from Apple. In the past, Chinese businesses had little suspicion of India. Far from viewing Indians as enemies, they saw India as a massive market for capacity export and a land of opportunity. By feigning modesty and superficial friendliness, Indians exploited China's competitive involution and lack of vigilance. They acquired vast amounts of infrastructure, industrial products, and advanced technology at rock-bottom prices. It's important to note that China either paid hefty sums or opened its markets to obtain such technologies from Western economies, or Chinese engineers developed them through grueling 996-style overtime. Meanwhile, many Chinese companies endured Indian defaults after painstaking worker situation where India reaped enormous benefits from China. Yet, fortunately, India's recent pivot to confrontation with China has led to consequences. Not only has China restricted exports of advanced industrial products and technologies to India, but India has also suffered greater losses. In Q1 2025, China's largest trade surplus partner remained the US $76.6 for $7 billion, followed by the EU $63.663 billion and Southeast Asia $54.467 billion. India ranked 4th, contributing a quarterly surplus of $27.559 billion to China. From 2019 $56.84 billion to 2020 for $100.85 billion, China's annual surplus with India nearly doubled. Measured by individual nations, this surplus now trails only that with the US, a testament to India's stark industrial gap with China. As India's economy grows, its demand for Chinese-made imports will only increase. In Q1 2025 alone, China's exports to India rose 11.8% year-on-year in USD terms, Thus, it serves China's interests to treat India as an export market for industrial products rather than a recipient of industrial and technological capabilities unless India actively shifts its approach to become a friendly neighbor, which remains highly unlikely given its mindset. Consider this: among China's 14 land neighbors, only India and Bhutan under Indian influence have yet to finalize land border demarcation. China managed to resolve borders with even Russia, but negotiations with India stall, a telling sign of India's deep-seated hostility. Pakistan's recent air combat victory over India, though seemingly a localized event, carries profound long-term implications due to its overwhelming margin of success. Psychologically, it has sent a powerful deterrent to India and anti-China forces globally. In conclusion, Chinese citizens must abandon illusions about India. For the foreseeable future, Sino-Indian friendship remains a pipe dream. Amidst century-scale global shifts, India will likely intensify efforts to sabotage the China-Pakistan economic corridor. But here's the silver lining: we'd rather be rivals mocked by India than partners betrayed by it.